I'd like to take you all back in time to an extraordinary day that would change the course of history. For many, it began with the following proclamation. Now we know it is official. The long delays, the anxious days and weeks we have all been through are over. The great adventure has begun. The final chapter in the history of the Second World War is being written. Now, those very words began our broadcast from London in 1944. The day was D-Day. The Battle of Normandy had begun. My name is Wright, Bryan, and following that announcement, I delivered the first radio broadcast of U.S. troops storming the beaches of France to fight the Nazis. How I got there and how it changed my life is a story of unexpected detours on the road to destiny. Now, I was born in Atlanta in 1905. My father, Arthur Bryan, was a professor at Clemson University in South Carolina. I think you've already heard about Clemson tonight, haven't you? I was born in my grandparents' house over on Peachtree Street. My mother, Inez Sledge, came from a long line of Georgia politicians and judges. And even though we lived in South Carolina, my connections with Atlanta were strong. Now, in addition to teaching, my father wrote sports reports for local papers. Well, that's how I caught the bug for journalism. And when I went to college, at Clemson, of course, I worked on the school newspaper. After I graduated with a degree in engineering, I took a little detour and ended up working at the Atlanta Constitution. Now, this decision set me on a path that would land me in the history books. But first, my life took another turn when I met Ellen Hillier Newell. Oh, her smile could light up the night sky. Her great-grandfather had been governor, grandfather mayor of Atlanta. And in 1932, we married in a flurry of teas and dinners that were chronicled in the society pages. Ellen possessed this great strength of character, dedicated much of her adult life to the Girl Scouts, empowering young women. She was instrumental in expanding the organization to include women and girls from the Black community. And she even helped save founder Juliet Gordon Lowe's house in Savannah from the wrecking ball. As someone once said, Ellen bleeds green, color of the Girl Scout uniform. Now, I could go on all night about my Ellen, but I do want to share with you my extraordinary experiences of D-Day and the broadcast that would change our lives forever. Now, I never imagined I was destined to play a role in one of history's epic battles. In 1942, I joined NBC London to report on the war. 2 years later, another one of my detours led me onto a C-47 transport plane named Snooty. I flew across the English Channel with U.S. troops headed to German-occupied France. And in the pre-dawn hours of June 6, 1944, our plane Snooty flew into the sky to initiate Operation Overlord, the code name for D-Day. I watched as those first paratroopers leapt onto the French countryside behind enemy lines. I stood at the rear of the plane as American paratroopers billowed out across the sky and the Germans began their assault. The sounds of scattered gunfire pulsed in our ears, accompanied by bright, blinding explosions. As our plane banked and turned back toward London, a parade of Allied planes roared past, filling the air with parachutes. As those brave boys jumped through the smoke and onto the fields below, hours later, Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy in the largest amphibious invasion in history. Now, when I landed in London, I furiously wrote my first-hand account of that momentous day. My story for NBC scooped all the other networks, and they came together and decided that my report would be the first one aired to our entire nation. After statements by Allied Command Winston Churchill and President Franklin D. Roosevelt, I went on the air, live. It was morning in London, 3:30 a.m. here at home. WSB Atlanta called my Ellen, who sat by the radio and listened to the broadcast that made me a household name. Afterwards, I returned to France to broadcast the liberation of Paris in August 1944. One day, I was with a group of reporters who were ambushed by the Germans. I was shot, captured, sent to a prisoner of war camp in Poland. Eventually, our camp was liberated by the Russians, and I returned here to Atlanta to recover. Then, in 1947, on behalf of President Harry Truman, General Eisenhower himself presented me with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. In later years, interviewers often said that I was modest about my achievements. But when you've seen soldiers truly risk their lives, well, you can only be humble about your own contributions. After the war, I continued to work, stayed involved with Clemson until I retired in 1970. And then in 1991, just shy of 86 years old, I arrived here in Oakland. 1998, my beloved Ellen joined me. Medals and honors aside, my life was filled with lucky breaks, a loving family, and remarkable detours. I'd like to thank you all for coming by and letting me share my story with you. And I'd like to leave you tonight with one final thought. Embrace your detours. Sometimes they are destiny calling your name. Thank you and good night.